A prime minister just walked out of Downing Street for the last time. Keir Starmer told the country, "My work is done," got into a car and drove to Buckingham Palace to hand his resignation to the king. Within the hour, his successor made the exact same trip. Britain now has its 7th prime minister in a decade. Here's how we got here, what Starmer actually said on his way out, and who's taking over. Chapter 1. The Final Speech. Starmer's exit from Downing Street was short and notably not bitter. He opened by saying he was heading to the king to close the book on his time as prime minister, framing his tenure as complete rather than cut short. His pitch on the record, taking Labour from a historic defeat in 2019 to a landslide general election win in 2024, then pointing to a stronger economy, falling NHS waiting times, fewer children in poverty, lower immigration numbers, and a strengthened defense posture during his 2 years in office. He also leaned into something less measurable, describing the front row seat the job gave him to witness what he called the resolve, grit, decency, and compassion of people serving the country, whether in the military, the NHS, or as volunteers in their communities. He tied that directly to the current moment, framing Britain as under pressure from adversaries seeking to divide the country over its values and its support for Ukraine, and argued that leaning on national unity and character is the way through it. He closed by formally passing the baton to Andy Burnham, thanking his family, his staff, the civil service, and the country, and ended on a specific, quotable note. He said he was leaving with good grace, with a smile, and proud of what had been achieved. Chapter 2. Why this is happening now. The official framing is an orderly, planned transition. The underlying story is a prime minister whose own party ran out of patience. Starmer's Labour government won a genuinely dominant majority in the 2024 general election, ending 14 years of Conservative rule. But his personal approval ratings fell sharply over the following 2 years. Public polling consistently found voters didn't feel the change Labour had promised was actually showing up in daily life. A scandal involving Peter Mandelson, appointed by Starmer as the UK's ambassador to Washington despite his past association with the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, added to the political damage. Starmer ultimately fired him. The moment that appears to have broken the dam was Labour's local election losses in May, where the party lost significant ground to a populist, anti-immigration party. That result reportedly pushed more of Starmer's own MPs to openly call for his removal. By late June, Starmer acknowledged publicly that his party was questioning whether he was still the right person to lead them into the next general election, and said he accepted that verdict. Chapter 3. The Handover Timeline. Once Starmer signaled he'd step aside, Labour moved through a defined leadership process. Nominations opened in early July and ran until Parliament broke for its summer recess about a week later. Only one serious contender emerged, Andy Burnham, who had just won a decisive by-election victory that gave him, for the first time, an actual seat in the House of Commons. Burnham was confirmed as the new Labour leader at a special party conference in mid-July, ahead of formally taking office as Prime Minister on the following Monday. That handover followed the traditional constitutional choreography. Starmer traveled to Buckingham Palace to resign to King Charles III, and shortly afterward, Burnham made the same journey separately to be invited by the king to form a new government. Moving trucks were reportedly seen outside 10 Downing Street over the preceding weekend, about as literal a signal of transition as it gets. Who Andy Burnham actually is. Burnham isn't a newcomer to British politics, but he is new to the House of Commons, which is part of what makes this transition unusual. He spent roughly a decade as the elected mayor of Manchester, Britain's 5th largest city, building a regional profile substantial enough to earn him the nickname King of the North in UK political media. To become Prime Minister through the normal parliamentary route, Burnham first had to actually sit in Parliament. He stepped down as Manchester's mayor to contest a by-election in Makerfield, in Greater Manchester, and won it comfortably in mid-June, which cleared his path to be sworn in as an MP just days later. His arrival in Westminster got plenty of media attention. Camera crews tracked his train journey from Manchester into London, and he was heckled by at least one MP on his way into Parliament, quoting the famous Monty Python line, "He's not the Messiah." Burnham's own response, calling himself a naughty boy in reply, leaned into the joke rather than dodging it, a small but telling detail about his political style. Chapter 5. What's actually different and what isn't. Substantively, this is a change of leader within the same governing party, not a change of government. Burnham and Starmer are both members of the Labour Party, and Burnham inherits the same parliamentary majority Starmer won in 2024. That's led to some pointed skepticism from opposition figures. At least one senior Conservative lawmaker has already described Burnham as Keir Starmer with a northern accent, a jab suggesting voters shouldn't expect a fundamentally different governing approach, just a different face delivering it. Where Burnham may genuinely diverge is on tone and specific policy emphasis, particularly around immigration, an issue that was central to Labour's local election losses in May. During his by-election campaign, Burnham explicitly warned against Britain adopting what he described as American-style politics, a comment that suggests at least some intent to chart a distinct course rather than simply continue Starmer's approach unchanged. One major open question hanging over his premiership from day one: how he handles Britain's relationship with the Trump administration. Starmer had made a deliberate effort to stay closely aligned with Washington, with mixed results, and that balancing act has only gotten harder since the outbreak of the Iran war, which has already strained at least one other European leader's relationship with the White House, despite an initially compatible ideological footing. Burnham hasn't yet signaled a clear departure from Starmer's approach, but the alliance with Washington remains one of the most consequential relationships he'll have to manage immediately. Chapter 6. The bigger pattern: instability since Brexit. Zoom out, and this handover fits an unmistakable pattern. Burnham becomes the UK's 7th Prime Minister in roughly a decade, a run of turnover that traces directly back to the 2016 Brexit referendum. That decision to leave the European Union is widely understood to have shrunk the British economy in the years that followed, fueled ongoing anger at the political establishment, and contributed to a period of chronic instability at the top of British government that this latest transition simply extends. Starmer's own tenure, barely 2 years as Prime Minister despite having won one of the most decisive general election victories in recent British political history, is itself a data point in that pattern. A landslide mandate wasn't enough to insulate him from the same pressures that have cut short most of his recent predecessors' time in office. The mood on the ground. Reporting from outside Downing Street on the day itself described a scene with genuine emotional weight. Starmer was greeted with applause as he left for the final time, and journalists on site described Labour staff and government ministers visibly moved, some in tears as they watched him depart. That reaction points to something worth separating from the political mechanics of the handover, whatever the internal party pressure and polling numbers behind this resignation. The people who worked directly for Starmer inside government appear to have experienced this as a genuinely significant, emotional moment, not simply a routine reshuffle. Chapter 8. What to watch now. A few things worth tracking as Burnham actually starts governing. First, whether he makes any early, visible break from Starmer's policy positions, especially on immigration, the issue most directly tied to Labour's recent electoral losses. Second, how he handles the relationship with the Trump White House, particularly with the Iran war still shaping how European leaders are being received in Washington. Third, whether Labour's internal pressure eases now that Starmer is gone, or whether the same forces that pushed him out start applying pressure to Burnham on a similarly short timeline. And underneath all of that, whether this handover marks the end of Britain's post-Brexit run of short-lived premierships, or simply the next entry in it. Where things stand right now. Keir Starmer has formally resigned as Prime Minister, delivering a farewell address that framed his 2 years in office as complete rather than cut short, before traveling to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation to King Charles III. Andy Burnham, fresh off a by-election win and a decade as Manchester's mayor, has been confirmed as the new Labour leader and is taking over as Prime Minister, inheriting the same parliamentary majority without a general election. He becomes the UK's 7th Prime Minister in a decade, a run of turnover tracing back to the 2016 Brexit vote. His most immediate tests, the same immigration politics that helped cost Starmer his position, and the far more delicate question of how closely to align with the Trump administration currently managing the fallout of the Iran war. I'll be following Burnham's first moves in office as they happen.